The evening air in Maplewood carried the crisp bite of early autumn, laced with the smell of wood smoke and damp soil. The streets were calm, lined with tall oaks dropping their leaves in slow spirals, and the town's heart seemed to beat at a lazy rhythm. For Officer Daniel Hayes, this was the kind of night he both loved and feared. Too quiet, too still, the sort of silence that could either promise peace or hide something waiting to unravel. Beside him, Rex walked with the steady discipline of a seasoned K9 partner, nails clicking faintly against the pavement. The German shepherd's ears were alert, his golden-brown coat glowing faintly under the dim street lamps. To Daniel, Rex was more than a partner. He was a compass, a reminder that instincts often revealed truths human eyes overlooked. "Another night in paradise, huh, boy?" Daniel muttered, tugging his jacket tighter against the chill. Rex gave a soft huff, but then his body stiffened. His head turned sharply toward the open countryside, where the silhouette of an old barn stood against the fading twilight. Daniel frowned. The barn had been abandoned for years, a relic of the town's farming roots. Its roof sagged, boards warped by storms, weeds choking the fence around it. To most, it was just a forgotten structure, but Rex's posture said otherwise. The dog's muscles coiled, ears high, tail rigid. He wasn't just looking. He was locked onto something unseen. Daniel followed Rex's gaze. "What is it?" His voice was low, carried more by instinct than need. The barn remained still, shadowed, with no light inside. Yet in Rex's stance, Daniel felt an undercurrent of urgency. He tugged lightly on the leash, expecting his partner to move on. But Rex planted his paws firmly, growling under his breath. For a brief moment, Daniel's chest tightened. He remembered another night years ago, another silence broken only by instinct. Back then, he hadn't listened closely enough, and 2 runaway teenagers had slipped beyond his reach. That failure still clung to him, lingering like smoke he could never wash out. Now Rex's warning gaze stirred that same unease, only sharper, heavier. All right, Daniel said softly, crouching beside his partner. He rubbed behind Rex's ear, but the dog didn't relax. His eyes stayed locked on the barn as if it were whispering secrets only he could hear. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of damp hay and something else Daniel couldn't place. He exhaled, trying to shake the weight pressing on his chest. This was supposed to be just another routine patrol in a town where people still left their doors unlocked, where the loudest disturbance most nights came from teenagers, revving trucks in empty parking lots. Yet here was Rex refusing to budge, insisting the night was not as calm as it seemed. Daniel rose slowly, scanning the fields. "We'll check it out tomorrow," he murmured, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were more for himself than for Rex. Rex gave a low, rumbling growl, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Daniel placed a steady hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension thrumming beneath the fur. "Easy, boy. Not tonight." But as he led Rex away, the barn loomed larger in his mind, its outline carved against the dusky sky. It wasn't just an old structure anymore. It had become a question mark, a riddle left unsolved. And in Maplewood, riddles didn't stay quiet for long. Before we dive deeper into this chilling, true-to-life inspired story, make sure you subscribe to our channel for more gripping narratives like this one. The leash tugged again as Rex glanced back over his shoulder, unwilling to surrender his silent warning. Daniel caught the look and knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Whatever waited out there in the countryside, whatever hid behind those splintered walls, would not stay hidden forever. The night might have seemed calm, but beneath its surface, something had already begun to stir. Morning came with the sharp clang of the sheriff's office phone ringing off the hook. Daniel stepped through the doorway with Rex at his side, the scent of burnt coffee and paperwork heavy in the air. Sheriff Margaret Collins stood near the bulletin board, her graying hair pulled back, eyes sharp as ever. She didn't waste time. 14 kids, she said, voice clipped. Youth group out of St. Luke's Church. Supposed to be home last night. Never showed. Daniel froze. 14? She nodded grimly. Their bus driver reported mechanical issues outside town. They were supposed to walk the last mile home. Parents assumed they made it, but none of them returned. 14 missing, ages 6 to 16. The room seemed to constrict around Daniel. 14 wasn't just a number, it was an entire world of families collapsing in fear. He could almost hear the voices of parents flooding the station, demanding answers. Deputy Kyle Turner burst in, his tie loose, eyes wide. "Sheriff, they're crowding outside already. Reporters too. Folks are panicking." Collins's jaw tightened. "They have every right to panic." She turned to Daniel. "You're with me. We start the search immediately." "Time's already against us." Rex paced at Daniel's feet, restless, as if he already understood the gravity of what was unfolding. By mid-morning, the town square was a storm of confusion. Parents clutched photographs, reporters shouted questions, volunteers demanded direction. A mother cried out, clutching her husband's arm, "My baby's only 8!" He wouldn't wander off. Another father shook with fury. 14 kids don't just vanish in one night. Someone did this. The words carved themselves into Daniel's mind. Someone did this. He knelt briefly to steady Rex, whose ears twitched, eyes flicking toward the road that led out into farmland. The memory of last night clawed at him. Rex frozen, locked on that barn. Daniel had brushed it aside. Now guilt rose in his throat like bile. As Collins organized search teams with practiced authority, Daniel lingered near her. "Sheriff, last night Rex was fixated on the old barn off Miller's Road. Wouldn't take his eyes off it." Collins narrowed her gaze. "You think it's connected?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, voice low. "But I've learned not to doubt him." He sensed something. "I should have—" He cut himself off, unwilling to confess his regret fully. Collins studied him, then nodded. "We'll sweep that area, but first we cast a wide net. Kids that age could have scattered, panicked." Kyle chimed in, eager, almost too eager. "Odds are they just wandered. Maybe found shelter, maybe even a prank." Daniel turned sharply. 14 kids don't disappear as a prank, Turner." His voice carried more edge than he intended, but the room quieted around it. For a moment, silence hung, broken only by the static of the police radio. Collins broke it with steel in her tone. "No theory is off the table, not yet. We move fast, we move smart. Everyone here, every second counts." Search parties formed quickly. Volunteers carried flashlights, deputies packed radios and maps. The woods beyond the church were combed, creeks and back roads checked. Helicopters thundered above, their blades chopping through the tense air. As hours passed, the weight of absence grew heavier. Each path searched and cleared brought more dread than relief. Parents gathered at the command post in the firehouse, faces pale, hands trembling as hope slipped further away. In the crowd of grief, Daniel saw his own reflection. Years ago, the 2 runaways had vanished on his watch, and he'd carried that scar in silence. Now, with 14 young lives at stake, the wound reopened. He felt Rex's presence beside him, steady, unyielding, as though reminding him that this time could be different, if only Daniel would listen. By late afternoon, Collins ordered the team back for regrouping. Nothing, not a footprint, not a trace of fabric. The woods had swallowed them whole, but Rex wouldn't sit. His gaze fixed again, unrelenting, on the same direction as before, toward the barn. Daniel followed that line of sight, heart pounding. He didn't need words to understand what Rex was telling him. Whatever had happened to those children, the answer was waiting where the shadows lingered. The search was only beginning, but the first threads of dread had already taken hold, pulling everyone deeper into a night they would never forget. The sun dipped low over Maplewoods fields, casting long shadows that crept across the dirt roads. The air smelled of dry corn husks and gasoline from patrol trucks scattered across the countryside. Deputies worked in pairs, combing through brush, their radios crackling with updates that all carried the same disheartening word: negative. Daniel drove slowly along Miller's Road with Rex in the back seat, the dog pressing his muzzle against the open crack of the window. His nose twitched constantly, ears flicking at sounds Daniel couldn't hear. Sheriff Collins's voice came over the radio. "Unit 4, you're near the Miller barn. Sweep the perimeter and report." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He knew this wasn't coincidence. Rex had been staring at that barn since last night. When they arrived, the structure stood like a skeleton against the dimming horizon. Its red paint had faded to grey, roof caved in on one side, the field around it overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. To anyone else, it was just another ruin. To Daniel, it felt alive with silence. Kyle Turner pulled up beside him in another cruiser. The young deputy jumped out, brushing his blonde hair back and smirking faintly. "This is what your dog dragged us out here for. An old shack ready to collapse." Daniel shot him a look. "Rex doesn't fixate on nothing." Kyle kicked at a loose board near the fence. "Or maybe he just smelled raccoons." "Don't tell me you're going to hang a whole case on a dog's gut feeling." Before Daniel could retort, Rex let out a low, steady growl. The shepherd stood rigid at the barn's locked door, tail stiff, nose pressed to the wood. He barked once, sharp and loud, the sound echoing across the fields. Daniel walked closer, kneeling beside him. The wood smelled faintly of oil and damp hay. He pressed his ear against the door, hearing nothing but the creak of boards settling. Still, his gut twisted. "We need a look inside," he said firmly. Kyle raised a brow. "Without a warrant? That'll play real well in court. Sheriff told us to check the perimeter, not break in." Daniel straightened, jaw tight. "We're not in court. We're trying to find 14 kids who disappeared without a trace." Kyle's smirk faltered, but he shook his head. "I'm not explaining to Collins why we tore down a farmer's door with nothing to show for it. We'll sweep the area, document what we can. That's it." Frustration burned in Daniel's chest. He wanted to argue, to force the issue, but protocol had teeth, and Collins trusted him to follow the chain of command. Breaking it would only weaken the case if they were right. He unclipped Rex's leash, letting him circle the barn. The dog sniffed the ground with precision, pausing where weeds bent unnaturally. Daniel crouched, running his fingers over faint impressions in the soil, tire tracks half hidden by grass, fresh enough that the dirt still held shape. "Somebody's been here," Daniel muttered. Kyle leaned in, skeptical. "Farm equipment. Could have been weeks ago." Daniel held up a small wrapper caught in the weeds. Bright colors, sticky with sugar, a candy brand popular with kids. He looked at it like it was a message left behind. Kyle hesitated but didn't concede. "It's still not enough." Rex barked again, louder this time, clawing at the base of the door. The sound made the hair on Daniel's arms rise. He met Kyle's gaze, voice quiet but unyielding. "You can keep doubting, but my partner's telling us something. And I'll trust him before I trust coincidence." Kyle folded his arms, unwilling to answer. The fading light painted the barn in deep orange shadows, stretching it into something more ominous than abandoned wood and nails. Daniel clipped Rex's leash again, pulling him back with effort. "We'll wait for Collins," he said, though the words tasted bitter. Every second away from the truth felt like failure waiting to repeat itself. As they walked back to the cars, Rex turned his head sharply, eyes fixed on the barn one last time. Daniel followed his gaze, and his stomach sank. This place wasn't empty. He could feel it in the marrow of his bones. Night descended quickly, swallowing the countryside in a cloak of darkness broken only by beams of flashlights and the distant hum of generators. The sheriff's station had transformed into a command post, its parking lot crowded with pickup trucks, squad cars, and frantic townsfolk desperate to help. The air was heavy with sweat, coffee, and the raw metallic tang of fear. Inside the station, maps were spread across tables, red pins marking areas already searched. Volunteers lined up for instructions, their faces pale but determined. Parents clung to each other, murmuring prayers, their eyes darting every time the radio crackled. Sheriff Collins stood at the center, her voice rising above the chaos. "No group goes out alone. Pair up, sweep your zones, and report in every 30 minutes. We'll find them." Her tone was steady, but Daniel could see the strain etched around her eyes. He moved among the volunteers, checking gear, offering clipped words of reassurance he barely believed himself. Rex padded beside him, tail low, his sharp gaze never still. Every time the dog paused to sniff the air, Daniel felt the faint hope that he might suddenly lunge forward, leading them straight to the missing kids. But Rex only paced, unsettled, as though he could sense the enormity of what was at stake, yet couldn't pinpoint it. A mother broke down near the corner of the room, clutching her phone as if it could conjure her daughter back. "She's just a baby," she whispered. "What if she's cold? What if she's hungry?" Her husband held her, his own jaw clenched tight. Daniel turned away, the weight pressing harder against his chest. He knew those questions had no answers, not yet. Out in the field, search parties pushed through thick woods, flashlights slicing through the trees. They called names into the night, voices echoing back hollow. The only replies were the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of night birds. Every shadow seemed too deep. Every gust of wind carried the possibility of movement. At the edge of the barn property, Thomas Reed, an older farmer who had lived in Maplewood all his life, approached the deputies. His weathered hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "That place gives me the creeps," he muttered, glancing at the barn looming in the distance. "Always said it wasn't just empty. Heard noises out there plenty of nights." Kyle Turner scoffed, brushing him off. "Probably raccoons, like I said earlier." But Thomas didn't flinch. "I know the sound of raccoons, son. This was different. Like voices when there shouldn't be any. Kids' voices." Daniel's stomach tightened. He locked eyes with Rex, who was already staring at the barn again, ears forward, body tense. Back inside the barn, unseen to the outside world, Sarah Miller sat with her knees pulled tight to her chest. The air was damp, thick with the smell of dust and mold. Around her, the younger children whimpered softly, exhausted from crying. She whispered to them, her voice trembling but determined. "Stay close. Don't let go of each other. They'll find us. I promise." Her words steadied the group for the moment, though her own heart raced. She pressed her ear to the wooden wall, straining to hear beyond. Muffled sounds, dogs barking, voices calling. For the first time, hope flickered inside her. But the footsteps of their captors returned, heavy and deliberate. She pulled the younger kids closer, forcing herself to stay calm. Whoever had taken them wasn't done yet. Back at the station, Collins gathered the officers again. "No signs, no tracks, nothing concrete. It's like they vanished into thin air. But kids don't just disappear." "Someone knows something." Daniel clenched his fists. He thought of Rex, of the barn, of the candy wrapper caught in the weeds. His gut screamed at him, but the chain of command still held. And yet, as the night stretched on, the fear in Maplewood grew thicker, settling over the town like a storm waiting to break. The night dragged on, restless and long. In the sheriff's station, officers rotated in and out, drinking bitter coffee and marking fruitless searches on the map. But Rex refused rest. He paced the floor beside Daniel, nails clicking against the linoleum, head snapping every time the wind rattled a loose shutter. Daniel rubbed a hand over his tired eyes. "So you're not going to let this go, are you, boy?" Rex stopped, ears pricking, eyes turning toward the window. Beyond the glass, the darkness stretched toward the fields, the barn barely visible against the horizon. The shepherd let out a sharp bark, startling a few deputies. Collins looked up from her desk. "What's with him?" Daniel straightened. Same as before. "He knows something's out there." Kyle, leaning against the wall, smirked tiredly. "Or maybe he just hates barns." Daniel ignored him. He crouched beside Rex, running his fingers over the dog's tense shoulders. "Show me," he whispered. Rex pulled toward the door, straining against the leash. The determination in his body was unmistakable, his entire frame vibrating with urgency. Collins walked over, arms crossed. Her voice was steady but low, as though she didn't want to feed false hope. "You really think he's onto something?" "I don't think," Daniel replied firmly. "I know. Look at him. He won't eat, won't rest. Hasn't broken focus once since last night." The sheriff studied Rex for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Fine. We'll check the area again." "But I want evidence, Hayes. Something concrete, not just instincts." "His instincts are more than enough," Daniel muttered, but he clipped Rex's leash, ready. The small team drove back out, headlights cutting through mist settling low over the fields. The barn loomed larger in the dark, its frame creaking faintly in the wind. When they parked, Rex shot forward, pulling Daniel toward the structure, barking furiously. His claws scraped at the packed dirt near the threshold. Kyle groaned. "We've been here. There's nothing." Daniel crouched, brushing away loose soil. His fingers found impressions, faint but there. Small shoe prints overlapping, pressed into the earth before being half covered by dust and weeds. His breath caught. "Kids," he whispered. "Multiple, recently." Collins crouched beside him, frowning. "Could be old." Daniel shook his head. "No, look at the edges. Still sharp. Rain hasn't washed them yet." Rex whined, pawing again at the ground, nose pressed tight to the cracks between warped boards. He barked, then shoved his muzzle under the lowest plank, inhaling deep. His tail stiffened, body frozen as though he'd found the scent he'd been chasing for 2 days. Daniel pressed his ear to the wood. At first, there was only silence, the groan of old nails, the hum of wind. But then, faint, so faint he thought he might be imagining it, a muffled sound like movement beneath the floor. He jerked back, heart pounding. "There's something under there," Kyle laughed nervously. "What, ghosts?" Daniel's glare cut him off. "Footsteps, voices, I swear it." Collins held up a hand. "Enough. We'll get a proper team, ground-penetrating radar if we have to. If someone's hiding something in there, we'll find it." Daniel's fists clenched. Waiting felt unbearable, but he knew pushing too hard could compromise everything. Still, his eyes stayed locked on the barn, and Rex remained pressed against the door, barking into the dark as if demanding the world listen. Collins turned back toward the cruisers. "We'll regroup and authorize a full search at dawn. Whatever's in there, it's not going anywhere tonight." But Daniel wasn't so sure. He tightened his grip on Rex's leash, every nerve in his body screaming that time was bleeding away. The barn loomed behind him, silent, unmoving. Yet beneath that silence, Daniel was certain something was alive, something that didn't want to be found. The first light of dawn crept across Maplewood's fields, painting them in pale grey. A damp chill hung in the air, heavy with the smell of wet earth after the night's mist. The barn stood ahead, its silhouette sharper now, less a ghost in the distance and more a waiting presence. Sheriff Collins arrived with a warrant in hand, her expression lined with both fatigue and resolve. "No more hesitation," she said firmly. "We're going in." Deputies fanned out, weapons ready but lowered, their boots crunching over gravel. Daniel held Rex by his side, the dog quivering with tension. When Collins gave the signal, a crowbar pried the rusted lock from the barn door. The wood groaned as it swung open, the smell of mold and rot wafting out like a breath that had been held too long. Inside, the barn was a cathedral of dust. Shafts of early light pierced through broken slats, catching swirls of particles in the air. Old farm tools lay scattered, rusted pitchforks, a broken wheelbarrow, coils of brittle rope. Hay bales sagged against one wall, their edges blackened by damp. But what struck Daniel most was how wrong it felt. The space was too neat in places, too recently disturbed in others. It wasn't just abandonment, it was abandonment staged. Rex pulled forward immediately, nose to the ground. His growls echoed off the beams as he traced a path toward the center of the barn. Daniel followed, his chest tight, listening for any sound beyond their own movements. Collins's voice was sharp. "Search every inch. Look for signs of habitation." Deputies spread out, opening crates and shifting bales. A shout came from the far corner. Kyle held up a small shoe, mud still clinging to the sole. The room froze, everyone staring. Daniel walked over, his stomach knotting. The shoe couldn't have been there long, the leather wasn't cracked, the laces intact. "This is fresh," he muttered. Rex barked suddenly, claws raking the wooden floorboards. Daniel knelt, pressing his hand against the planks. Cold. He leaned down, ear flat against the wood. For a moment, he heard only silence. Then, faintly, something else. A muffled sound, like movement below. His heart slammed against his ribs. "There's something under us," he whispered. Collins stepped forward quickly. "Find a hatch." They searched frantically, running hands along walls, probing corners. Near the far wall, Daniel spotted a seam in the floor, barely visible, covered by scattered hay. He shoved the debris aside, revealing an iron latch. With a grunt, he pulled it open. A ladder descended into darkness, the air rising from below cooler. carrying the faint stench of oil and mildew. Daniel's flashlight beam cut through the void, illuminating crates stacked along dirt walls. He climbed down first, Rex leaping nimbly after him. The underground chamber stretched farther than he expected, more a tunnel than a cellar. The crates bore shipping labels torn away, their sides dented and scarred. He opened one, empty. Another, also empty, but every surface screamed of recent use. Scuff marks on the dirt, impressions of small bodies having sat or crouched. A crumpled juice box in one corner. Candy wrappers. A blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and sweat. Daniel's throat tightened. They were here. Collins's voice echoed from above, cold with realization. Then where are they now? The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. Kyle muttered, "It's like they've vanished again." But Daniel shook his head, anger pushing past the dread. No, they were moved, and not long ago. Rex growled low, nose pressed to the tunnel's dirt floor, his tail stiff. He was following a scent still fresh enough to stir his instincts. Daniel rose, his voice quiet but edged with steel. Whoever took them, they're one step ahead. But not for long. The emptiness of the barn was no relief. It was proof of something larger, something deliberate, and it meant the children were still out there, close, but slipping further away with every moment. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and rusted metal, each breath heavy with the weight of stale air. Daniel swept his flashlight slowly across the dirt walls, the beam catching the gleam of nails hammered into wooden supports and the jagged edges of crates stacked haphazardly. Rex padded ahead, nose low, tail stiff as a rod. His growl vibrated softly, a warning that something lingered here. Daniel crouched near a crate, brushing dust from its lid. The wood was splintered, corners dented as though forced shut in haste. He pried it open, revealing nothing but scraps of packing tape and a rag that smelled faintly of gasoline. His jaw tightened. It wasn't what was inside that mattered, but what had clearly been taken out. "Hayes," Collins's voice carried from the ladder above, sharp with urgency. "Report." "They were down here," Daniel answered, his voice echoing against the tunnel walls. "Kids, no doubt." He picked up a small sock half buried in the dirt, its fabric still warm from a body that must have worn it not long ago. Collins climbed down to join him, her boots crunching softly. She scanned the room, her eyes narrowing at the disturbed soil, the debris scattered in patterns too deliberate to be random. "They cleared this place out in a hurry." Kyle dropped down after her, brushing dust from his uniform. "So what? They camped here, moved on. We're back at square one." Daniel turned sharply. "Square one? This is evidence. We've got proof of movement, proof of captivity." He thrust the sock toward Kyle, who hesitated before looking away. Rex barked suddenly, claws digging into the dirt near a wooden beam. Daniel knelt beside him, shining his light where the dog scratched. The soil had been recently disturbed, darker and looser than the surrounding ground. He dug with his hands until his fingers struck something hard, an iron handle. With Collins's help, they pulled up a narrow trapdoor, its hinges groaning. Beneath it, a tunnel sloped downward, darker and colder, the air seeping out, carrying a faint metallic tang. Collins frowned. "This isn't just a hiding place, it's a system." Daniel's stomach clenched. "They've been moving them through here." Kyle stepped closer, his flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. "How deep does it go?" Daniel shined his beam into the passage, revealing tracks pressed into the dirt. Small shoe prints, overlapping, leading deeper. His chest constricted at the sight. 14 children had walked that path, perhaps hours ago. He rose, voice low but urgent. "They're moving fast, covering their trail, but they're close, too close." Collins's jaw tightened. "We'll need backup. If this connects to other properties, we're dealing with something bigger than a runaway case." Daniel met her eyes, the weight of realization pressing down on him. "This isn't just abduction, it's organized." The words sank into the silence of the chamber. Organized meant planning, resources, networks, things far beyond what Maplewood deputies were equipped for. Rex pulled again, straining to follow the tunnel's path. His growls grew sharper, echoing in the tight space. Daniel steadied him, torn between following immediately and holding ground. Collins made the call. "We seal this entrance, mark it, and regroup with state authorities. We can't rush in blind." Daniel's fists clenched, the urge to disobey burning inside him. Every instinct screamed that waiting meant losing the trail forever. Yet Collins's order was clear, her tone unshakable. As they climbed out, the barn's silence pressed heavier than before. To the volunteers outside, the deputies emerged with grim faces, the weight of what they'd uncovered unspoken but understood. Daniel glanced back one last time at the trapdoor before closing it. Rex whined low, resisting, but Daniel whispered, "I know, boy. I know." The discovery brought no relief. Only a new fear that whoever built those tunnels had already vanished into the night with the children, and they weren't finished yet. The afternoon sun burned low, turning the horizon into a smear of orange and red as the deputies prepared to secure the barn and the hidden tunnel. The air was thick with the restless noise of radios, the shuffle of boots, the strained voices of volunteers waiting for answers. But beneath the movement, a silence coiled, one that Daniel couldn't shake. Rex whined softly, pacing at the end of his leash. His ears pricked toward the tree line that bordered the farmland, his nose lifting as if scenting something that the others were too distracted to notice. Daniel crouched, rubbing Rex's shoulder. "What is it, boy?" The answer came in the form of a sharp crack, a gunshot that split the air. "Cover!" Collins barked, instinct snapping through her voice. Deputies ducked behind patrol cars, volunteers diving for the ground as another shot rang out, this time splintering wood from the barn's frame. Daniel yanked Rex close, pressing him down behind a wheel well. His heart hammered. This wasn't random fire. Someone was watching them, guarding the barn, desperate to keep them from digging deeper. Kyle's voice cracked over the radio. "Multiple shooters in the tree line, east side." The team returned fire, the air filling with the deafening rhythm of gunshots, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the earthy scent of fields. Daniel risked a glance over the hood of the car, spotting movement among the trees, shadows slipping back and forth, coordinated, disciplined. "These aren't locals," Daniel muttered. "They know what they're doing." Collins crouched beside him, her jaw tight. "We hold position. No one chases into the woods blind." Rex growled, pulling against the leash, muscles taut. He wanted to run, to take the fight directly to the threat. Daniel tightened his grip. "Not yet," he whispered, though the restraint burned in his chest. The firefight stretched for minutes that felt like hours. Bullets snapped against metal, bark flew from trees, radios screamed with overlapping orders. Then, as quickly as it began, the gunfire stopped. The woods fell silent again, save for the panting of deputies and the distant echo of footsteps retreating. "They're pulling back," Kyle said, peering cautiously. "Why quit when they had the upper hand?" Daniel knew why. They bought themselves time. Collins's face hardened. To move the children. The realization spread like ice through the group. Every second spent pinned down was another second the abductors used to widen the gap. Rex barked sharply, tugging hard toward the tree line. But Daniel held him fast. His instinct screamed to follow, to hunt, to push until he found them. Yet he could still hear Collins's earlier words echoing. "Don't rush in blind." A deputy stumbled past, clutching his arm where blood seeped through his sleeve. Daniel grabbed him, pulling him down to safety. "Stay still. Pressure on it. You'll be all right." The young man's eyes were wide, his breath ragged. Didn't see them. They moved like ghosts. Daniel swallowed the rising anger. Ghosts or not, they were human, and humans made mistakes. He had to believe that. As medics treated the wounded, Collins gathered her team. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the fear she fought to hide. "They wanted us to know we're being watched. This isn't just about hiding kids, it's intimidation. They're telling us the game's theirs." Daniel spoke quietly, though his words cut like steel. Then they underestimated Rex. He looked down at his partner, whose eyes blazed with determination. "They can run, but they can't erase their trail." The deputies exchanged glances, some doubtful, some hopeful. But everyone felt the truth of his words. The dog would not rest until he dragged the scent of the children back into daylight. The shooting had ended, but its echo lingered. The traffickers were out there, moving, calculating, and as darkness threatened to fall again, Daniel knew this was no longer a search. It was a race. The command post inside Maplewood's firehouse buzzed with tension. Radios blared, phones rang without pause, and reporters clustered outside, shouting questions through the windows. Parents crowded the lobby, their voices raw with fear and anger. The weight of 14 missing children bore down on every soul in the room. Daniel sat on a folding chair near the corner, shoulders hunched, Rex curled tightly against his boots. His partner's eyes never closed, tracking every movement in the room. The shepherd was restless, just as Daniel was. Across the table, Sheriff Collins rubbed her temples before addressing the deputies. "State authorities are en route. Until they arrive, we hold our perimeter and keep combing the woods." Her words did little to ease the atmosphere. A mother sobbed openly, clutching her child's photo. A father slammed his fist against the wall. "Hours wasted. My daughter doesn't have hours." Daniel flinched at the sound, guilt cutting sharper than any bullet. He heard echoes of his past failure, the 2 runaways whose names still haunted him. "You hesitated. You didn't push hard enough. You failed them." Kyle leaned against the wall, his face pale but voice defiant. "We're spinning our wheels. They're long gone by now. We should be checking highways, not circling barns." The room stirred, murmurs rising. Some nodded grimly, others shook their heads. Daniel's jaw tightened. He stood, his voice low but heavy with conviction. "They're not gone. Not yet." Kyle scoffed. "And what makes you so sure?" "Because your dog growled at a pile of wood." Daniel stepped closer, heat rising in his chest. "Because Rex hasn't been wrong once in his career. He's telling us they're near, and I'll trust him over guesswork." The air crackled with the unspoken tension between them. Collins cut in, her tone sharp. "Enough, we don't fight each other, we fight the clock." "Turner, sit down." Kyle muttered under his breath but obeyed, sinking into a chair with folded arms. Daniel lowered himself again, running a hand through Rex's fur, grounding himself in the steady rhythm of his partner's breathing. Still, the guilt gnawed at him. If he'd pressed harder last night, if he'd forced entry into the barn sooner, maybe the kids wouldn't have been moved. Collins approached quietly, crouching beside him. Her voice softened just enough for him to hear. "You're blaming yourself, aren't you?" Daniel didn't answer at first. He stared at the scuffed floor tiles, listening to the chaos around him. Finally, he exhaled. "I should have done more. Rex knew. I ignored it." Collins shook her head firmly. "Hayes, you did your job. You kept to protocol. That's what keeps us from losing everything in court later. Don't carry what isn't yours." He met her gaze, eyes heavy. "But what if those 14 lives pay the price for my restraint?" She held his stare, her words unyielding. "Then we'll keep pushing until they don't. This isn't about you, it's about them. And we don't stop." The conviction in her tone steadied him, though the guilt didn't fully loosen its grip. Just then, Rex lifted his head sharply, ears swiveling toward the barn's direction, as if some invisible thread tugged at him. His eyes burned with urgency. Daniel felt it like a spark in his own chest. He rose slowly, clipping Rex's leash. He hasn't let go of that trail. "Not once." Collins straightened. "And maybe that's exactly what will save them." The firehouse filled with the restless hum of voices, phones and static, but Daniel only heard the faint whine of his partner, the sound of instinct refusing to surrender. The media outside shouted louder, their cameras flashing through the glass, their headlines already painting Maplewood as a town haunted by vanishing children. Inside, doubt spread like wildfire, threatening to burn the search apart. But Rex had not given up, and Daniel wouldn't allow himself to either. The inside of the truck smelled of rust, oil, and fear. 14 children sat huddled together in the dark, the only light seeping through thin cracks in the metal walls. Every bump in the road jolted them, every shift of gears made their stomachs tighten. The younger ones whimpered softly, their small hands clinging desperately to the older kids. Sarah Miller sat near the front corner, her back pressed against the cold steel. At 16, she had become the anchor the others looked to without speaking. Her pulse hammered, but she kept her voice steady as she whispered, "It's okay. Stay close. We'll get out of this." A boy no older than 8 buried his face against her shoulder. "Are they going to hurt us?" Sarah swallowed hard, forcing calm she didn't feel. "No, they just want to scare us. But people are looking for us right now. They'll find us." She didn't fully believe her own words, but she knew the children needed to. The truck jolted violently, throwing them sideways. One of the smallest, a 6-year-old girl named Emily, began to cry. Sarah wrapped an arm around her, stroking her hair. "Shh! We need to be quiet. If they hear us, it'll only get worse." "Can you be brave for me?" Emily sniffled, nodding weakly, her small hand gripping Sarah's tighter. Sarah glanced around at the others, reading their pale faces in the dim light. She knew panic was their greatest enemy. Panic would break them apart, make them easier to control. She had to keep their minds focused on something else, anything else. "Let's play a game," she whispered. "We'll go around and say our favorite place in Maplewood. I'll start. Mine is the ice cream shop on Main Street, the one with the red awning. I love the smell when you walk in." For a moment, silence hung. Then one boy, maybe 12, spoke timidly. "I like the river. In summer we go swimming." Another girl added, "The library. It's quiet there." "Feel safe." One by one, voices joined in, fragile but growing stronger. For a few minutes, the rattling truck wasn't a prison. It was a circle of memory and hope. When it came back to Sarah, she leaned close, lowering her voice. "Remember those places. Hold on to them. That's where we're going back. You have to believe that." The children nodded, their eyes a little less haunted. Sarah pressed her palms against the floor, feeling the vibrations of the road. She tried to memorize the rhythm of turns, the bumps of gravel versus pavement. If she could just hold on to the pattern, maybe she could trace it back later. The truck slowed suddenly, brakes screeching. The children froze, breaths caught in their throats. Harsh voices barked outside, men speaking in short, urgent tones. Sarah strained to catch words but couldn't make sense of them. The lock on the back door rattled. Sarah raised a finger to her lips, eyes wide. The younger kids stilled instantly, trusting her lead. The door creaked open just enough for light to slash through. A man's silhouette loomed, face hidden in shadow. His eyes scanned the children, lingering on Sarah for a heartbeat before he slammed the door shut again. The truck lurched forward once more, the sound of tires fighting mud. Sarah exhaled slowly, forcing her fear down. She leaned close to the group. "Listen to me. They don't want us seen. That means we're still worth something alive. And if we're alive, we have a chance." The truth of it steadied her as much as it steadied them. She locked her gaze on the cracks of light, whispering to herself as much as to them, "Hold on. Someone's coming." She didn't know who, but deep inside, she believed it. And for now, belief was enough. The storm rolled in fast, black clouds swallowing the horizon, wind snapping through the fields with a low howl. Rain pelted the ground in sudden sheets, turning dirt roads into slick ribbons of mud. Patrol cars skidded as their tires fought for grip, red and blue lights flashing like beacons swallowed by the countryside. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Rex braced in the passenger seat, ears pinned forward, nose pressed against the glass. The dog whined, then barked sharply, his head snapping toward a side road where faint tracks cut into the wet soil. Daniel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "He's got something." The radio crackled with Collins's voice. "Unit 3, report." Daniel pressed the receiver. "Fresh tracks heading north. Heavy vehicle, maybe a truck. Rex is locked on." "Copy. Proceed with caution. We're converging." The cruiser fishtailed as Daniel pushed it down the narrow path, rain slapping the windshield in blinding sheets. The wipers screeched furiously, barely keeping up. Rex barked again, his body quivering with urgency. Kyle's voice cut through the radio, sharp and doubtful. "You sure we're not chasing farm equipment? Could be anyone hauling supplies." Daniel snapped back. "Not in the middle of a storm, Turner. These people are running and we're on them." Rex growled as if to underline his point. The tracks veered sharply across an open field, tire ruts carving deep scars into the wet earth. Ahead, headlights glowed faintly through the storm. Two vehicles, a van and a pickup, bouncing wildly as they sped across the farmland. Daniel's pulse surged. Visual on suspects. Repeat. Visual confirmed. Collins came over the radio, her tone crisp. All units, intercept. Do not let them reach the highway. Daniel floored the accelerator, the cruiser jolting violently as it followed the ruts. Mud splattered the windshield, the engine groaning under the strain. Rex barked furiously, paws pressed against the dashboard, as if urging Daniel to go faster. The van swerved, fishtailing dangerously before correcting. For a split second, the back door rattled, and Daniel thought he saw the outline of small hands pressed against the metal from inside. His chest clenched. "They're in there," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "The kids are in that van." The pickup behind the van suddenly slowed, then veered sideways, blocking the deputy's path like a shield. Two men leaned from the windows, dark silhouettes against lightning flashes. Muzzles flared as gunfire ripped through the storm. Bullets pinged off Daniel's hood, one shattering the side mirror. He ducked instinctively, gripping the wheel tighter. "Hang on!" Collins' voice thundered over the radio. "Return fire, but don't lose the van." Deputies behind Daniel leaned from their cruisers, weapons cracking through the downpour. The pickup swerved again, tires spinning in the mud, desperate to keep the convoy moving. Daniel's jaw locked. He knew the van was the priority. Every second wasted meant the children slipping further away. He jerked the wheel hard, slamming the cruiser through a ditch, mud spraying as he cut around the pickup's blockade. The car bucked violently, but it surged forward, closing the gap. Rex howled, his nose pressed to the glass, tracking the van with laser focus. Daniel pressed the radio. "I've broken through, staying on the van." Thunder cracked overhead, rattling the earth. The van struggled against the slick road, tires spinning as they hit a rise in the farmland. Daniel could feel the desperation of the driver, every maneuver reckless, frantic. For a moment, the van's rear door shuddered again, and this time Daniel was certain. Through the slats, two terrified eyes met his. His grip on the wheel tightened with renewed fire. "We've got them," he whispered to Rex. "We're not letting them go." But the storm only worsened, wind screaming, rain slashing sideways. The countryside became a blur of mud, trees, and lightning. The chase was far from over, and Daniel knew the traffickers had planned too carefully to give up easily. The children were close, but so was danger. The storm raged like a living thing, lightning tearing across the sky as the van skidded into a muddy stretch near the outskirts of an abandoned silo. The engine howled, wheels spinning uselessly as the heavy vehicle sank deeper into the muck. Daniel slammed his cruiser to a halt, heart pounding. "They're stuck," he muttered, gripping the wheel tight. Rex barked furiously, claws scraping against the glass. The van's doors flung open. Two men jumped out, shouting orders to each other over the roar of wind and rain. They scrambled to the pickup behind, clearly preparing to abandon the cargo. "Not a chance," Daniel growled. He threw the door open, rain lashing against his face. Rex leapt out beside him, fur soaked instantly, but his focus was unbroken. His growl cut through the storm like a blade. Collins's cruiser screeched to a stop behind Daniel. She stepped out, weapon drawn, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Sheriff's Department, hands where I can see them." One of the traffickers raised his gun instead. Muzzle flash lit the night, a sharp crack swallowed by thunder. Daniel dove behind his door as bullets sparked against metal. Rex barked, teeth bared, straining at the leash. Deputies fanned out, returning fire. The storm turned the battlefield into a blur of mud, flashing light and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Daniel knew they couldn't risk a stray bullet hitting the van where the children were hidden. He released Rex, voice cutting through the rain. "Go!" The shepherd bolted, a streak of muscle and fury. He lunged at the nearest gunman, jaws locking onto the man's arm with bone-crushing force. The weapon clattered to the ground, the man screaming as Rex dragged him into the mud. The second trafficker cursed, swinging his rifle toward the dog. Daniel surged forward, slamming into him before he could fire. They crashed hard into the dirt, rain splattering their faces. The man's elbow drove into Daniel's ribs, knocking the wind from him. But adrenaline surged hotter than pain. Daniel grabbed the rifle, twisting it away before jamming his fist into the man's jaw. Collins's voice rang out again, commanding, unyielding. "Drop your weapons now." Deputies closed in, securing the first man Rex had subdued, handcuffs snapping tight around his wrists. Rex growled low, standing guard with teeth still bared, rain dripping from his muzzle. The second man spat blood, glaring up at Daniel. "You think you've won? You don't even know who you're fighting." Daniel pressed him harder into the mud, fury in his eyes. "Then tell me where the kids are." The man sneered, lips curling into a grin that chilled more than the storm. Too late. Before Daniel could press further, the man twisted violently, trying to break free. Deputies rushed in, dragging him back and slamming cuffs onto his wrists. He struggled, spitting curses, but the fight was over. Daniel staggered to his feet, chest heaving. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, every breath tasting of metal and mud. He turned toward the van, its doors still chained shut. Collins joined him, her voice steady despite the battle still echoing in their bones. "We have to get them out." Daniel nodded, sprinting to the rear. He yanked at the lock, but it held firm. "Bolt cutters!" he shouted. A deputy rushed forward, snapping the steel with a single heavy crunch. Daniel flung the doors open, flashlight beam piercing the darkness inside. What he saw stole his breath. Small faces blinked back at him, eyes wide, cheeks streaked with tears and grime. 14 children huddled together, the youngest clinging desperately to the older ones. One voice rose among them, hoarse but steady. "Please, help us." Daniel's throat tightened, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He turned to Collins, his voice shaking with relief. "We found them." But as the storm raged, a gnawing truth lingered. One man was still missing. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The sight of the children packed inside the van froze every deputy in place. Rain hammered the metal roof, dripping onto pale faces, streaking through dirt and tears. The silence broke when a little boy sobbed into Sarah's shoulder. Daniel climbed into the van first, his boots sinking into a puddle on the floor. "It's okay," he said softly, voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." Sarah lifted her head, her eyes red but blazing with defiance. "Are you really the police?" "Yes," Daniel answered without hesitation. He showed her the badge clipped to his chest, the shine dulled by mud and rain. "Officer Hayes, this is Rex. We've been looking for you." At the sound of his name, Rex stepped closer, tail low, ears forward. The shepherd's presence was commanding yet gentle, and the children's eyes widened with awe. Emily, the youngest, whispered, "Doggy." Her small fingers reached out, trembling, and Rex nuzzled her hand carefully, a low whine slipping from his throat as if he understood. Sarah tightened her arm around Emily. "They kept us locked in. They said nobody would come." Daniel's throat clenched. "They were wrong. You're going home." Behind him, deputies worked quickly, helping the children out of the van one by one. Collins directed the process with calm precision, ensuring each child was counted, each name checked against the missing list. Parents who had rushed to the scene sobbed as they recognized their sons and daughters, collapsing into embraces that made even hardened officers blink back tears. But Daniel's relief was not complete. He scanned the perimeter, senses sharp. The firefight had subdued some of the traffickers, but not all. One man, the leader, was unaccounted for. Sarah stepped down from the van, holding Emily's hand. She stopped in front of Daniel, lifting her chin. "You came because of your dog, didn't you?" Daniel blinked, surprised by her clarity. "Yes, he never gave up on you." Sarah knelt briefly, stroking Rex's wet fur. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved us." Rex licked her hand once, a solemn seal of promise. For a moment the storm seemed to fade. Relief swelled, raw and powerful. Daniel felt a weight lift, the ghosts of his past failure loosening their grip. This time, he hadn't been too late. Yet even as deputies wrapped blankets around shivering children, Daniel caught Collins's gaze. Her eyes were steady, but beneath them he saw the same thought forming. One of the men was missing, and men like that didn't vanish quietly. A deputy rushed over, breathless. "The driver's gone, slipped into the woods during the fight." Collins swore under her breath. "He's not leaving Maplewood. Not alive." Daniel's pulse quickened. He looked at Rex, who already had his nose lifted, sniffing the air with sharp focus. The shepherd barked once, short and decisive. Daniel turned back to Collins. "He's on the move." "Rex can track him." Collins hesitated, glancing at the soaked, frightened children. "We need to secure them first. Medical checks, reunions with parents—" "I know," Daniel interrupted gently. "But if that man gets away, he'll come back. He's not finished." The words hung heavy in the storm. Collins gave a reluctant nod. "Go." "We'll hold here." Daniel clipped Rex's leash, the dog quivering with anticipation. He cast one last look at Sarah, who stood wrapped in a deputy's blanket, her eyes following him with a mix of fear and faith. "Be careful," she whispered. Daniel managed a small nod. "I will." "You're safe now." As he turned toward the dark line of trees, Rex surged ahead, pulling him into the shadows where the storm howled louder. Relief lingered at his back, but ahead waited unfinished business, the final piece of a nightmare that refused to end quietly. The woods were alive with the storm, trees bending and groaning under the weight of the wind. Rain poured through the branches in heavy sheets, soaking Daniel as he followed Rex deeper into the darkness. His flashlight beam swung wildly, cutting brief paths through the black, but it was Rex who led with certainty, nose low, tail rigid, body vibrating with purpose. Daniel's breath came in sharp bursts, each inhale tasting of wet leaves and mud. He tightened his grip on the leash, his voice low but urgent. "Find him, boy, don't lose him now." Rex pulled harder, growling under his breath as he wove between trees. The dog stopped suddenly, head snapping to the right. Daniel crouched, shining the beam where Rex pointed. Footprints, deep, fresh, pressed into the mud. Heavy boots running fast. Daniel's pulse kicked. They were close. He unclipped Rex's leash. "Go." The shepherd bolted, his bark splitting the storm. Daniel sprinted after him, branches whipping his arms and rain stinging his eyes. Adrenaline drowned fatigue as he pushed harder, following the sound of Rex's snarls ahead. Through the downpour a figure emerged, stumbling along the creek bed. The man's jacket was torn, mud streaking his face, but his eyes burned with desperation. He turned at Rex's growl, raising a pistol with trembling hands. Daniel shouted, "Drop it! You're done!" The man sneered, voice hoarse but defiant. "You think a dog and a washed-up cop can stop me? You have no idea who I work for." Rex lunged before the man could aim. The shepherd slammed into his arm, teeth clamping down, the pistol firing into the air as the man screamed. Daniel closed the distance, tackling him into the mud. They rolled violently, fists and elbows flying. The man's strength was wild, fueled by desperation, but Daniel's fury burned hotter. "Where were you taking them?" Daniel demanded, pinning the man's wrist into the ground. The trafficker spat mud, grinning through the pain. "You think saving a few brats changes anything? There are more barns, more trucks. You can't stop it." Daniel's jaw clenched. The man's words were meant to cut, to plant doubt. But he refused to let them sink in. He slammed cuffs onto the trafficker's wrists, locking them with a final snap. "Not tonight." "Not here," the man thrashed, but Rex stood over him, teeth bared, growl rumbling like thunder. The trafficker's defiance faltered, his eyes flicking nervously to the dog's gleaming fangs. Daniel pressed his radio, breath ragged. "Suspect in custody. Repeat. Suspect in custody." Collins's voice crackled back through static, sharp with relief. "Copy that. We've secured the kids. Bring 'em in." Daniel yanked the man to his feet, shoving him forward through the storm. Each step back toward the clearing felt heavier, but the weight wasn't dread anymore. It was resolution. Rex trotted close, ears still forward, body tense until the man was fully restrained by deputies waiting at the edge of the woods. As they dragged the trafficker into the light of flood lamps, Collins approached, rain dripping from the brim of her hat. Her eyes locked on Daniel. "You did it." Daniel shook his head, glancing down at Rex, who sat at his side, panting but proud. "We did it." The sheriff's gaze softened. "One man doesn't end this fight. But tonight it saves 14 lives. The trafficker spat again, but his voice carried no weight now, drowned by the storm and the shouts of children being reunited with parents nearby. Daniel crouched, resting a hand on Rex's soaked fur. "Good work, partner," he whispered. The dog leaned into his touch, eyes gleaming with something fierce and loyal. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the grip of his past loosen. He hadn't failed this time, he had listened, he had trusted. And together, he and Rex had pulled 14 children back from the edge of disappearance. The storm still roared, but for Daniel, a fragile calm had begun to break through. Morning broke over Maplewood with skies washed clean, the storm's fury replaced by a fragile calm. The town square, which had been a place of panic and anguish, now filled with the sound of laughter and sobs of relief. Families clutched their children tightly, refusing to let go as deputies guided them toward warmth, food, and safety. Daniel stood a little apart from the crowd, rain-soaked uniform drying stiff on his body. Rex sat pressed against his leg, tongue lolling, eyes bright despite the exhaustion written in every line of his posture. The shepherd had worked without rest, and now he seemed to bask quietly in the peace he had helped deliver. Sheriff Collins approached, a rare softness in her voice. "They're safe." "That's what matters." Daniel nodded, his gaze drifting across the reunited families. His throat tightened as he spotted Sarah holding Emily, both wrapped in blankets. Sarah's eyes found his, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Two survivors of different battles, bound by the weight of what they had carried. She crossed the square, Emily trailing close behind. "Officer Hayes," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion lining her face. "I wanted to thank you for not giving up." Daniel shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank Rex. He never let me stop." Sarah crouched, stroking Rex's fur. The dog leaned into her touch, eyes half closing as though finally at peace. Emily giggled softly, whispering, "Best dog ever." Daniel managed a small smile. "Yeah, he is." Collins joined them, her presence grounding. "You showed courage most adults wouldn't have, Sarah. Keeping the little ones calm, giving them hope, that saved lives too." Sarah flushed, but her chin lifted. "I just did what I had to. They were scared, and oh, so was I. But I couldn't let them see it." Daniel studied her, recognizing in her words the same determination that had kept him moving when his own fear threatened to paralyze him. "That's bravery," he said quietly. As the children were loaded into buses to be taken for medical checks, townsfolk gathered to honor the deputies. Applause broke out, raw and heartfelt, echoing across the square. Parents clapped Daniel on the shoulder, their words tumbling over each other. "Thank you, God bless you, you saved them." For the first time, Daniel let himself breathe deeply, the air no longer tasting of failure, but of redemption. The ghosts of the two runaways who had haunted him seemed to ease, their shadows fading in the morning light. He had carried the weight for years, but now he knew. He had made it right, at least in part. Collins turned to the crowd, her voice carrying with quiet authority. "What happened here is a reminder. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it hides in barns, on back roads, in shadows we think we know. But as long as we stand together, neighbors, officers, families, we will not let it win." The applause swelled again. Daniel lowered his hand to Rex's head, whispering, "We did good, partner." The dog's tail thumped softly against the ground. Sarah gave one last look before boarding the bus, her voice faint but filled with conviction. "You kept your promise." "I'll never forget that." Daniel watched her go, the words sinking deep, steadying him more than she could know. The sun broke fully over Maplewood then, bathing the town in a fragile warmth. For the first time in days, people allowed themselves to believe in safety again. Daniel stood quietly, his hand resting on Rex's back, knowing their work wasn't done, that more shadows waited beyond this victory. But for now, there was peace, and 14 children who had been given back their lives. And that was enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more unforgettable real-life inspired tales. And don't miss the next video suggested on your screen. It will keep you at the edge of your seat.